Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in. Hope you are doing well. I hope that there is joy in your life. It's a weird week, weird week for me. That I'm glad I'm recording this on a Friday. So I'm very much looking forward to a weekend. I'm especially excited. Personally, I know this is not a sports podcast, but the New York's NYCFC home opener is this weekend. So this will be my first time seeing my favorite football team of the many football teams that I have an affinity for in person. So I can't wait have my first live sports experience of the MLS season. I know I say this is not a sports podcast, but and this is the only sport I follow because when I was, this is probably maybe like almost 10 years ago now. This is back when the 2014 World Cup was happening. I was not into sports at all. I actually was maybe vehemently, not anti-sports, but aggressively not taking in or watching sports or at any point, because I very much was of the opinion at a certain point in my life that you could either be like sports and be a jock and be or you could be into art and be an artist, and I never the two shall meet. And I feel like that was stupid, because people who are aggressively against following sports, given is there a sports ball game happening kind of jokes, which I feel like are starting to get out of date now, are kind of uniquely unfun to be around, the same way I don't have fun against very hardcore, very aggressive sports fans. Basically, extremes are what I guess I'm having a problem with in these two realms, because I enjoy the escape of watching athletics as something that I am not intending to pursue in my life, and I also enjoyed the catharsis of watching art that is different from the art that I pursue in my daily life, given this podcast or music or comedy. I enjoy doing all that stuff. The same way I don't understand, and this is just coming up on me now, I do not understand the mindset of certain comedians that don't watch stand-up comedy. The overall theme, and I probably played into this as well, is that you don't want to be influenced by other things that you watch. And I find that kind of sad, because presumably you started doing comedy because you saw it and enjoyed it. And I find that it is pretty easy, like when you're writing an act or you're writing sketch, sure, you'll have influences, but it's very, I think it's practical, especially if you have friends and support. It's very easy not to sound like somebody else, because after a while of doing it on your own, you will have incorporated your influences will get incorporated into who you are as a performer. That's just something I've come to lately in my continuous quest to tear down some of the dogmatic thinking that I subscribed to when I was younger, and probably less happy than I am today. So that's my 2 cents on that. Watch stuff that brings you joy. There's not enough time in the world, in existence, to be actively distancing yourself from things that would bring you joy. So I suggest embracing the joy. And that's what I intend to do today, because my guest on the show today is comedian Henry Phillips. Henry is an actor, comedian, musician, musical comedian, does a lot of different things. I first became aware of Henry through his appearance on Marc Maron's podcast, WTF, which I owe a huge debt of gratitude and inspiration to for inspiring me personally. I also, in another piece of art that I found really inspirational, Henry has a very great and memorable part in the Mike Birbiglia movie Sleepwalk with me. And that's how I was initially exposed to him. And his live comedy is a combination of stand-up and sort of absurdist funny folk songs. You might also know him from his YouTube show Henry's Kitchen, as well as his movie Punching the Clown and its sequel Punching Henry, which are some of my favorite depictions of stand-up comedy and what it's like to be a touring professional. And so I was so excited to get to have this chance to chat with Henry, because Henry is a guy that was around in Los Angeles at like a very pivotal time in the development of stand-up comedy as an art form, post the 80s boom and going into the formation of what gets described as alternative comedy nowadays. And I was very excited and eager to hear of this time and of his experiences and what goes into being a performer and what was happening at that time. And the other thing I love about Henry is he gives credit and gratitude to the folks that he collaborated with that have helped him. So I love that about him. And as somebody who's been inspiring me for as long as he has, it was really great to get and have this kind of connection with Henry. So I appreciate him for the time, and I appreciate all of you for listening to this. If you enjoy this podcast and are interested in anything else related to me or what Henry do, you can find the links in the description. You can also go to awesomedisaster.com for everything related to me. Henry's Kitchen is on YouTube, and you can find Punching the Clown and Punching Henry streaming now. And let's get into it. I talk a lot at the beginning of this particular episode, but there's a lot on my head, and I like checking in with you guys. So let's talk to comedian Henry Phillips. It's also cool. I feel like because I was just watching some of the Henry's Kitchen before we got on here, I feel like I'm almost it's like I'm talking to James Cameron from the set of Avatar from New Zealand. It's where all the magic happens.
Yeah, this is where the cooking gets done.
Amazing, dude. I'm very excited to chat with you, man, because I feel like tracing kind of my development as a stand-up comic, and a big portion of that has been in New York City. Mm-hmm. Around the time like I really needed it, like some kind of recognition of the struggle that I was in. That's when you came into my orbit, because I think around the same time I saw Sleepwalk with me, and then I also heard you on WTF, and I've been thinking a lot about your song Minneapolis Hollywood, because I've been having a lot of those moments lately. But I think your scene in Sleepwalk with me is the highlight of that movie. I really enjoy your part, man.
Where we're on the stoop.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I mean, Mike's an old friend, and I was we shot it. We stole the shot. Like, I don't think that they had the permit for it. I think we just sort of found a stoop that looked good, which is incredibly daring. And that's how I do everything. But I do everything terrified, like that somebody's going to come over and say, "Hey, you can't do that here," So
sure.
Maybe that added to the sort of like slightly kind of nervous energy that I always have, because I was just kind of like, at any point somebody's going to shut us down, so I just want to try to be quiet and just get through it, But yeah, I really remember really liking that scene.
Yeah, because at that part of the movie, like, at least for like Mike's like the development of Mike's character, like, and I had started having so many of those moments in New York myself, when you're just kind of like, you've done the set, or like you're in between comics and you're on in a few minutes, or the show's happened and you're just like shooting the shit outside on the street, and you're just kind of having like those bonding moments. It was really it was really, I remember watching that and going, I want more of those moments, those kind of like connections with comedians.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such a very New York shot that we got there too, It just looks like where you were at the time. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and that was shot completely no permits.
If I remember correctly, unless Mike will get in trouble by me saying that, But if I remember correctly, we didn't have that. We just kind of walked around the block and just said, "Does this look good?" And yeah,
Oh, that's amazing. I feel like that's how so much great stuff gets made, like just completely under the radar. I remember talking to I don't know if you'll know this guy, but there's a comic in New York. His name's Ray DeVito. He was telling me about
I know
uh
Ray.
yeah, Ray. So he had a part in a Bollywood movie from a few years ago, and he was telling me that they just kind of roll up into like any location, like get the shot super quick, and then by the time they're getting kicked out, they're already done.
Yeah,
And that kind of stress is probably why I think I haven't tried to shoot more independent film or shoot more stuff, because
yeah,
the idea of I have like a lot of, maybe similar to you, like a lot of like nervous, I don't want to get in trouble energy. So
yeah.
like the second I'm like doing something that's a little out of sync, I'm just like, I don't know, guys.
Yeah, that's exactly how I am. I've just always been one of these people that's just sort of like, hey, I don't want to ruffle your situation. I don't want to do something that's, annoying other people or whatever. And so, I just kept on thinking somebody was going to open the door and go, hey, what in the hell's going on here? You can't just do this. And, but yeah, it's tough, because that's well, even if you're shooting with a quote, like a legit permit situation, I always hated that too. I've been in that situation sometimes, when you're in public, and even though you have the area, still, people, you just get in your head. I remember we shot a scene for our movie that was in front of the Ha Ha Cafe out here in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of comedians that I kind of knew there but didn't really know. And in between takes, I'd talk to them. And they're like, so what is this? And I'm like, this is just, we're making a movie that's like a retelling of all his stories. So it's like a movie about you? Like you're making your own movie about you, and it just get insecure. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's hard to get all that stuff out of your head when you're doing something like that. That's why I really would rather be like on a controlled sound stage or, in a car or something that's easy to conceal.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's part of my appeal of the appeal to me of doing podcasts is that it's like a controlled environment,
Yeah.
somewhat. So doing this movie in New York, was doing a little bit of research coming into this. You're originally from the East Coast?
Yeah, I was born in Manhattan, and we lived there until I was about 8, up on 100th Street, and then moved to Englewood, New Jersey for a few years.
Uh-huh.
And then somewhere, I think it was in 7th grade that we moved out to Los Angeles. Moved back to New Jersey for a while because it was sort of an experiment for my parents and they liked it. So we moved back to New Jersey, mm-hmm. and then they sold the house, and then we moved back permanently to LA.
Gotcha. And and so growing up in New Jersey, what was Englewood kind of like? Because my idea of New Jersey is like very region specific. Like my brother-in-law lives like right in Haddonfield, like outside of out of Philly, so that's more like Philly adjacent.
Yeah.
And then northern New Jersey is like basically still thinks it's New York, and then you go far enough south, and then you would think you're in the South. So what's Englewood like for you?
Well, it's very close to the city, so it would be that middle category that you were talking about. Because my parents were there specifically because they wanted to be able to have easy access to the city.
Mm-hmm.
So, my cousin lives in Montclair, so I know that a little bit. I don't know a lot of what it's like to be in New Jersey, but I remember, okay, so my brother and I, when we moved out there as kids, I remember the first impression we had was like, wow, there's parks, green grass, and like, this is going to be amazing. There's like, we were so impressed with just the suburbia of it, like houses up and down a street. Like that was really striking because we literally played stickball, in the street on 100th Street, where you literally just have a stick, and then when a car comes, you have to run out of the way. But in Englewood, New Jersey, they had like an actual really nice park, and it was just very different. And so that part of it was cool. The people were very smart. I had the friends that I had back then. really high scoring, good grades, and
Mm-hmm.
could articulate themselves really well. We had a couple of friends, that I'm still in touch with actually, that are just extremely bright. We had one friend, my friend David, who was too smart for his own good because we used to play hide and seek, and we'd have like 20 kids in the neighborhood, and the way it would work is you'd be at the tree and you'd have to count to like 100,
Uh-huh.
and then when you were done counting, you'd have to find everybody. It was like in the middle of the pitch black of night. But I'd always hear David on the other side of the tree that I was counting on. And I was like, David, what are you doing? And he was like, well, my reasoning was that this would be a terrible place for someone to look for someone because it's so obviously not a good place to hide. So I thought maybe that's where I should hide. And I was like, "You're really smart, but that's really stupid." So yeah, we had a lot of brainiacs. No, but for real, yeah, very smart people.
Uh-huh.
It was
It just kind
interesting.
of circles around sometimes.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
Yes.
because I know a lot of very stupid smart people, and some of the um. So okay, so growing up in New Jersey, and were you exposed to like art early on? Were your parents
Yeah.
like musically inclined or interested in like
Um,
art in any way?
my parents weren't musical, but they were actors. My dad was a theater actor. My mom did a lot of commercials,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they would always go back and forth to the city. They'd do auditions and stuff, and they were very
Right.
well entrenched into the whole artistic community.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty normal growing up. To pursue something in the arts was definitely not unheard of. So I had definitely an advantage there because I've heard of a lot of people, and I knew a lot of people. Like when I got into my late teens, early 20s, and that time came, it's like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to, you know, get a job, that you'll do for the next 40 years, or are you going to try to pursue music or whatever? A lot of my friends went with the job because they were like, the idea of pursuing a career in music was never something that they would even think, that's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's just not even, there's no precedent for it. And so I was lucky that I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and pursue it because it's not like my parents could tell me not to. It's what they did, So,
Sure.
all that being said, of course, I did have a regular job throughout college and then afterward until I actually had something. And I'm always envious of some of my friends I mean, Doug Stanhope, who like literally quit high school at one point and just moved to Vegas and started. Well, it was a while before he started doing comedy, but he pretty much got a much earlier start doing it, and took me a lot longer to know that I wanted to do comedy. I think it was about 24 or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not too far off from when I started. I started when I was 23, and I had like been going to school for theater for years before discovering stand up. I remember being younger, and this might sound weird, but I remember being confused by like Comedy Central stand up specials. When I
Mm-hmm.
was younger, like I would just see someone on stage with a microphone and have no idea of like what was I watching. I had no
Yeah.
concept of it because the closest to stand up I knew when I was really young was Jeff Foxworthy albums, and I like couldn't see him. I could just hear him.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a while to come around to stand up as well. But it sounds like being that your parents were actors, like I imagine it almost seems maybe not necessarily predestined that you'd be around as well, but you have like the sort of like behind the scenes insider track of show business. Like you know about like what makes a good headshot and the trade, what's going on in the trades, I imagine.
Yeah, but actually, I acting wasn't the thing for me. Like so, it wasn't until I don't think I started doing any acting until I was about well, it's hard to say because my friend and I made an independent film when I was 26 based on sort of my exploits as a comedian. So
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't like a guy who was going around auditioning around town and with headshots and stuff like that. Um, So, as a matter of fact, I think I was kind of avoiding that because it's not like my parents were enormously successful, nothing against them,
Right.
but neither of them became household names, they were very good, but I think I was always kind of trying to avoid that life of going around from one audition to another and hoping, God, I
Mm-hmm.
hope I get it. I just wasn't really attracted to that. I was more attracted to stand-up comedy because I felt like it was proactive, and music. I
Mm-hmm.
should say, music was really the thing that got me into it. I really wanted to be a musician originally, but then my humor
Yeah.
started coming out in my songs, and then it sort of became the more fun part of what I was doing, and it just eventually went 100% music. Comics would bring me out to open for them because they thought, oh, well, this is good. It doesn't step on what I'm doing, but it's still in the comedy genre.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask you that. So it was actually so music for you first, and then
Yeah.
comedy starts seeping into it. And did you know? Were you attracted to playing guitar first? Was that
Yeah.
your first
Yeah. That
instrument?
I started doing when I was very young. I think it was right when we got to New Jersey in '78 or something like that. When I was 8 years old, I just started playing the guitar, and I just loved it. It was
Yeah.
just I was a big fan of Elvis as a little kid, and then later, only 5 years later, I was into Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and trying to make my guitar sound like that, and got a little amp and electric guitar in my teens, and Eddie Van Halen and all that stuff. And then in my late teens, I started getting into singer songwriter type stuff.
Uh huh.
And that's when I started writing my songs because I was like, I love James Taylor, for example, but I can't help but think of how funny it would be if he had that really nice, sweet singing voice, but he was singing something that he doesn't know is a little bit psychopathic, And then I was like,
Sure.
that would be funny to me, and so that's kind of where the act developed from.
Mm-hmm. And what year was this?
That would be like 22. Well, I was like 22, so that'd be like 92. I
Mhm.
dumped everything and went to college. Like when I was in my late teens, I did some catching up in community college and eventually went to UCLA, got a degree in political science, and there was not even a shred of art throughout that entire time. I was not playing guitar, I wasn't doing comedy or whatever. I was actually hanging out with one of my buddies from high school a lot because that was my only social life. And he was interesting. He was playing drums, and he was playing drums in these places around LA. And then he would have me, he'd call me and ask if I wanted to go, and I would go. And there was one night when he was playing drums for this sketch comedy troupe at this little theater called the Upfront Comedy Club. And there were
Uh-huh.
just four of the guys that I'm still friends with now. This is 30 years ago, and they started, or they were doing a sketch comedy thing. And my friend Eric said, you should have my friend Henry go up and do a song in between your thing, kind of like on SNL where they have the musical guest. And I
Yeah.
had one song back then that I would make my friends laugh with. This is about 92. I would make my friends laugh with, and it was just a ridiculous song of me reading out of the newspaper. And they were like, yeah, that could be funny. And so I started doing that, and it was terrifying. It was like every Friday
Yeah.
night, and I'm in front of like literally 15 people max in this place. But I
Yeah.
remember the Tuesday before the Friday just going, I can't believe I agreed to stand on stage and sing a song that's trying to be funny in front of a bunch of people. Like, it was terrifying. But the first time that I did it, it went really, really well. And then I started doing it every week. And at the same time, I started going around to LA to open mic nights and doing that song in various places.
Uh-huh.
And I did it one night at the Cynic Grill in LA, which was cabaret. There was a really strange night where this incredible show person who's been in New York now for like 20 years, Marc Nadler, he was performing at the Cine Grill, and he was probably just having a little bit of alcohol. Everybody was kind of drunk, and I was just there at 22 or whatever. I was hanging out in the back of the room, and for whatever reason, which never happened since, he was like, "Does anybody here have a song they want to do or share or whatever?" And I had been telling the bartender that I played music, and she goes, "You should have him do it," And I went up and did the song on the piano, and
Mm-hmm.
it destroyed. And then Marc said, "I want you to come back every week and do that song." And I was like, "Great." So I really had this song that was like a calling card of doing all this, and I was having fun. This is about my last year of college, and it was pretty evident that I was going to put off whatever career I was working for. I think I was interested in law at the time, and journalism was another one. But I was like, I'm going to put all of that off and just go around to LA doing this song and write more. And that's going to be sort of, I'll see where it goes.
Wow. That
Yeah, it was really,
that's
it's definitely
trippy,
a
man.
follow your dreams thing. And it was, it was poverty for 5 years because I was giving guitar lessons. I was tutoring English at the time, but I was sleeping in a lot of really, really questionable places. I remember at one point I was in like the attic of some weird guy from the Dominican Republic who had like
Mm-hmm.
very questionable activities going on downstairs, but I would give him like $50 a month to be able to sleep in the attic. That was for a
Right.
couple months. But I was like,
Uh-huh.
anything I can do to not have to go out and get a quote real job. But I was always known as the poor guy from all my friend circles and everything. I
Oh, sure, yeah.
just that was the trade off that I wanted to do.
Yeah. And there's something kind of cuz I remember those days for myself as well. There's something kind of like exciting and terrifying about that time in your life when there's like this thing you've discovered, and then it kind of will keep you going through like the worst of circumstances. I remember when I first moved to New York, I was renting a room in Sunset Park before it got trendy,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know who was going to be my roommate, and I was ended up like rooming with this aspiring actress slash exotic dancer uh,
Mm-hmm.
that we got super entangled and ended up with like the police eventually like breaking in my door, and it's just
Wow.
like, yeah, like it was it's an ins- it's an ins- ins- it was an insane time in my life. I would not want to do that now at 36, but I wear that as sort of like a I I did my time in the
Yes.
trenches of funny.
Oh yeah, those stories are just amazing, and almost all of my friends in comedy have those. Some more than others, but
Hmm.
yeah, no, I mean I had so many of them, and but I'm still friends with almost everybody from LA back during that time, thanks to Facebook. Everybody you're able to, or social media in general, but in my generation, it seems to be Facebook that it's pretty cool. It's impossible to completely lose touch with all these people. They're out there doing something. Um,
Yeah,
so that's pretty cool.
I'm also thinking about like the comedy scene in Los Angeles in the 90s. Like I've only
Hmm.
been to spend a little bit of time in LA, but I'm thinking about like the this is like the height of grunge, 1992, 93.
Yeah,
And the comedy boom of the 80s is probably has that fallen off yet?
yeah.
Or
I heard a lot about, oh, you should have been around 5 years ago because everything was so much better. I remember hearing that a lot.
But then I've also heard, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about this time and kind of what you're experiencing, because this
Hmm.
always gets described as like this is where like alternative comedy got birthed in Los Angeles during the '90s with like Ginny and Garofalo and like Uncabaret or Luna Lounge in New York. Who was around? Who were like? Who was around during that time? Like when you were like really just starting.
Okay, well, I would say, uh, because I always there's all these stories in New York about like, oh, I came up with so and so, and also in San Francisco, and I'm like, in LA, it's kind of harder to say that because they were all there. I'm not going to say I came up with Doug Stanhope, even though we were about the same age, because when I met him, he had already been doing the road for like several years, and people moved to LA to further whatever it was they had already built their roots doing.
Mm-hmm.
Tig, I don't know if Tig Notaro, she's always been there, a right parallel with when I was doing it. We did a lot of the same shows. We're really good friends, and so I think she's a good example of somebody that I sort of, I guess you could say, kind of came up with. But then there were also like one of the guys that I hung out with all the time was Chris Fairbanks, who was actually her roommate too. But
Mm-hmm.
again, he had already been in Austin building a lot of what he did. Hal Sparks, even though Hal and I are, I'm not really super good friends with him, just acquaintances, but he was always at the shows that I was doing and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm trying to think. Well, and then so the ones that you mentioned, like when you're talking about alternative comedy, so there was that show Largo. There was a place called
Yeah.
Largo, and you would go in there, and that was in the early '90s. There was a period, I guess you could say I was adjacent to it. As a matter of fact, I think I did the very first night of Largo when the guy Flanagan was like, "We're thinking about doing comedy in this place,"
Uh-huh.
and me and a couple of other comics did a show, and there was nobody there, and we were like, "Well, that was stupid." And then about 6 months later, it became the biggest thing ever because it was also a period of time that, for whatever reason, yeah, people like Janine Garofalo, Marc Maron, who I just saw yesterday morning at the supermarket, which is funny that you brought him up, but Bob Odenkirk, um, I mean, so many more, but I'm thinking of Dana Gould, Paul F. Tompkins, Patton Oswalt, Blaine Capatch, all these people, and that room, when it was full, it was just fire. I mean, it was like the
Yeah.
funniest, just laughing so hard. It was just an amazing room, and there'd be celebrities there. My friend Matt has a really funny story about he was there with his girlfriend, and he saw Mickey Dolenz, and he was really starstruck because he's a big Monkees fan, and
Uh-huh.
it was really hard to get a seat at Largo, and he had a seat with his girlfriend at the bar, and so at one point Matt went to go to the bathroom, and Mickey Dolenz asked Matt's girlfriend, "Hey, is it all right if I sit here?" And she goes, "No, my boyfriend's sitting there." And so then Matt comes back. She got up and went to the bathroom, and Dolenz comes over and says, "Can I sit there?" And Matt's like, "Absolutely, please do." And then she came back, and she's like, "What the hell?" And he's like, "I'm not gonna." And they still fight about it to this day. It's like, I'm not gonna give a, not give a seat to Mickey Dolenz. Are you kidding? So, yeah, no, Largo was just incredible. But there was a lot of crossover because I always heard there was a parallel thing going on in New York at this place. I think it was called Luna Lounge or something.
Yeah,
And
that's the
because I'd
one
see
that I heard of.
video, yeah, and but that alternative thing started happening like in a lot of other rooms too. And I did a lot of them, and so I know a lot of those folks, and I've become pretty good friends with a few of them. Um, that was where you started getting a lot of crossover with New York comics, because like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Sarah Silverman was there a lot, and um, there was a lot of bi-coastality or whatever between those.
Sure, yeah.
So like I started seeing a little bit more parallel there, and this is very interesting observation. They, because of podcasts and because of the sort of unification of everybody being able to see each other's videos every day, and people from New York, like it used to be I had no idea what was going on in New York, and when I went to New York, I was like, I remember doing UCB one
Mm-hmm.
night. Eddie Pepitone used to host the show, the hump day night or whatever, on Wednesday nights, and I was like, oh wow, they've got their own whole thing going on over here. It's very
Yeah.
different. Everybody's got these thick accents, and it's still extremely funny, but it's so different, and it's a lot snappier. David Tell and Jeff Ross and those guys, and I was just like, wow, this is really something. But I don't know. I don't know if you agree, but I feel like now, 20 years later, or whatever, it's a little harder to tell the difference between a New York comic and an LA comic, or a Chicago comic or a San Francisco comic. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
saying it's much. There's a lot of the same cadence that people use, and people look similar, and there's just sort of a little more unification than there used to be. Like back then, I felt like it was going to a foreign country or something, like to go into New York and to go to Houston for that matter, or Austin. It was like there was going to be a really different scene. But now, like if you go to
Mm-hmm.
Peoria, Illinois, chances are most of the local comics are they're going to sound a little bit like the comics that are doing it everywhere. That's just something that I've kind of noticed.
That's an interesting observation. I'm inclined to want to agree with you because the I remember like as far as like regional difference, as far as like scenes, from what
Mm-hmm.
I've heard, like the tales of on podcasts and the like my impression of New York comedy was always that it's a little bit more like aggressive, like there's more jokes because there's this idea the crowd like won't let you like stretch, or like you got to keep hitting them with punchline after punchline after punchline. Whereas I always thought like maybe out on the West Coast, like San Francisco and LA, you could like go off on a longer tangent and like bring it back. Like they'd give you that freedom of experimentation. But I'm inclined to want to agree with you now that I think it's possible to watch so much stand up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's maybe like a more common pool of influences. If there's one big change that I would say that's maybe taken on in American comedy recently is maybe and I want to think of the best way to phrase this. Been a greater introduction to, I think, American stand-up fans of like the Edinburgh style
Mm.
show, like more of like maybe not specifically Nanette as an example, but something that's maybe a little bit more theatrical
Well,
or
maybe like Mike
storytelling based.
Birbiglia.
Yeah, exactly. Like he was the first guy that I saw to do kind of that sort of long form storytelling that wasn't akin to like other long form like other storyteller comics I saw that you'd still see in clubs and stuff. So that's
Yeah,
the big change I've seen lately.
yeah. Like I think that was still going on 20 years ago, but it was not. It was a totally different pursuit. Like you would not think about making your comedy act like that because it just that was theater. That was like a totally different genre of spoken word, or whatever. And but you're right. Yeah, that did suddenly because everybody was started doing it. And they probably thought, well, how can I arrange my act so that it can be one of those types of shows? Because everybody probably wanted to be in that festival, the Edinburgh
Mm-hmm.
Fringe or whatever. And yeah, you had like people selling out, every night and getting to be big famous star. I mean, that's how yeah, I mean, Doug Stanhope got really big in the UK from having a really successful set of shows down there. And
Mm-hmm.
so then I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. That started becoming really popular. And yeah, I think Birbiglia was right there at the forefront of all that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember him doing, we were all on tour together, like five of us comedians in like 2004, I think, or five. The dates are a little hazy, but Mike started adapting his stand-up comedy into more of a show with an arc and an intro and a
Yeah.
sort of serious part toward the end or whatever. But that was a definite change for sure.
Yeah. I another influence, and I discovered him in college. I don't know how many other comics really. I've never heard a ton of other comics sign him, except for Maron, ironically enough, which if you could probably tell, I owe a huge debt to him as far as inspiration.
Oh,
Um,
he's great.
but
I've heard his new special is amazing. I haven't seen it yet, but
it's really good. It's
I
very
can't wait to see
funny,
it.
very cutting, and very personal. It's everything that he does very
Great.
well. The best he's done it. But in one of his albums, he mentions Spalding Gray, and my a professor of mine in college
Yeah.
turned me on to Swimming to Cambodia. This was before it was on DVD, and he lent me like this one DVD was like please be careful with this. And the first time I saw Swimming to Cambodia, that kind of blew my mind a little bit as well, because here's just this guy sitting down at a desk with like a rough outline, similar to the way I worked in stand up, where you just kind of do rough outlines and go from there. And he's telling these like very engaging stories, and that just exploded. So I wonder if maybe more funny people have found him too.
Yeah, yeah. Spalding Gray was really doing that way, way back when. And part of the reason I think it worked, that he actually had a lot of success with it, is because he was an interesting person. So it wasn't just the format, but he had amazing stories and told them really well. And I think stand-up comedy was sort of opposed to getting too serious, because
Yeah.
at least in LA, I mean, it was a little bit of a running joke. If a friend of yours was an actor, then they would invite you to their one-person show, and
Yeah.
it would be like getting jury duty. It's like, oh no, our friend, it's like, hey Matt, the bartender from the Coronet is doing a one-person show, and we have to go because he always gives us free drinks. So
Right.
you'd go, and it was just like, oh, because it'd be like, so there I was, in sixth grade with the whole class laughing at me, and it would become something that you would actually make fun of.
Yeah.
So it was not easy to pull off, but yeah, a lot of comics started doing it well, doing it successfully. Um, so that is a different that is definitely an evolution for
Yeah.
sure.
And then in the midst of all of this, here is you, and you're a musical comedian. Did you always feel like you were like a funny musician, or like a like what came first for you? Because I'm imagining like what like tent poles we had for musical comedy at the time. Like I know Weird Al had been around for a while, and then um, Tom Lear comes up a lot when
Hmm.
I search musical comedy. But was there anyone else doing like funny songs around that time, or was it really just you?
Well, let's see. Um, well, just to back up a little bit, so in high school, I was kind of always looking for a way to make people laugh. So I was kind of that guy,
Uh
and
huh.
and then afterward, when I was in my late teens and started pursuing music, not only was I extremely impressed with the sense of humor of the friends of mine that did music, like they would say things that would make me laugh so hard, but also I started finding that my friends were starting to I started getting this weird label as being the funny one or something like that. Like I remember having a guitar teacher, in the late '80s or whatever, who I said something like just sort of off the cuff that wasn't even like just something about our playing or whatever, and I don't even remember what it was, but I just remember like a couple minutes after I had already said it, he was still laughing at it, and he's just like, "Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
man, that really cracked me up." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of fun to crack people up with a sort of a sucker punch way, when they expect that you're going to say one thing and you say something totally different in a weird situation." And I really started enjoying making people laugh, and so but I was in music, so it's really a tough question. I think that I always put a lot of seriousness into the music, for
Yeah.
sure. And all of my peers were musical people, so it was like you wouldn't get away with just doing three chords that you just learned and then doing you know, the go-to joke of like, something a parody, wasting away in Diarrheaville or whatever,
Sure.
because
Sure.
that you
Yeah.
couldn't do that at a musical club. Everybody would just think, well, I want to have some actual music that is the thing, because you're making a joke, but the music has to be constant in order to make fun of it. But in terms of who was doing it, there really wasn't. Stephen Lynch, definitely, but I didn't hear about him until a couple years into it, like probably until about 2000 or so, or 2001, whereas I had
Yeah.
been doing
Same.
it in LA. But also, I was in a different side of the country, and like I said before, we didn't really know what was going on the other side, but he was apparently doing sort of a lot of the same kind of thing. And then when Adam Sandler came out with the Hanukkah song, that was just like, oh wow, you can really do this. You know, like this is a real thing that you can do. Prior to that, there was a definite eye roll that you would feel when you'd walk into the green room. Like when I'd go to San Francisco for the first time, I remember all these incredible San Francisco comics that all knew each other, and they're hanging out in the green room. Margaret Cho is one of them, and all these other ones. And I kind of walked in. I'm the guy from LA that they hate anyway. They hate LA. But
Sure.
I walk in with a guitar on my shoulder, and I could just tell they're too nice to bully me or anything, but they're just like, I could tell they were just like, oh, what's happening here? A guy with an acoustic guitar. And but I think once the comics saw that I wasn't actually killing, I wasn't getting like massive laughs. Sometimes I'd have better shows than others, but I think they were laughing because they kind of understood the joke that I was going for. I started getting more ingratiated, you know, into that world, you know.
Mm-hmm. You kind of like passed whatever test they had for
yeah,
you.
Yeah. I think once they realized, oh, this guy's going for the funny, he's not going for the
easy laugh,
the cheap joke. Yeah, and I think that's all anybody has a problem with, you know. Because then when Flight of the Conchords came by, and Tenacious D, even more so, everybody started really accepting doing musical comedy. And now these kids have it easy, but I was out there in the trenches.
Exactly. You walked so they could run, Henry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then how many years of being in LA? How long were you in LA before you started doing the road? Did you go out with Stanhope early on?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah. So we became friends at the Improv in the mid '90s, and it was really a pretty incredible time because he's the first guy that I was like, wow, this guy, like when I was in San Francisco, I saw his headshot as one of the up and coming comics. And to me, that was like being on the front page of GQ or something like that. I was like, how did you pull that off? Like, I don't understand how you do that. Like, how do you get to be the guy that everybody's going there to see or whatever? And he's just like, whatever, you know. You start as an open micer, and then a guy brings you out as the feature act, and then the club says, hey, you know, I'll give you less money, but if you can come out and close the show. You know, there was just sort of an order to it, but I was always amazed. And this is another thing. If you're in LA, you can't really work your way up that way because no one's ever going to bring you in as the MC in Indiana or Ohio or something like that because you'd have to get on a plane. There's no other way to do it. If you're from Peoria, Illinois, for example, well, you can do a whole run. You know, you got Kentucky and Indiana and all these places, so you could start as open mic and then MC, and then there's an actual hierarchy. In LA, you pretty much, your choices are become a headliner or become a famous sitcom star or zero. Right. Like there's really not a lot of in between. Now there is because you can make YouTube series and podcasts and independent films, but back then it was like so I was really impressed with Doug, and then Doug actually took several years before he wanted to see my act because we were friends, and he always said when I saw that you had a guitar, I was like, this guy's going to suck and I'm not going to want to be friends with him anymore. So let's just sort of take that part out of the friendship. And then one night, I remember we were at a place called Luna Park, which was a great room. That's where they did a lot of alternative comedy too. They had Uncabaret at that show. And this show was, I think it was an Aspen Comedy Festival showcase. And I went up and Doug was cracking up and he was like, this was great. And then it was like just... a few weeks later, he asked if I wanted to go with him to Houston to be the opening comic, and that was in '99, and that's when everything changed. Then I was like, okay, now that went well, and then the club owner asked me to come back and do my own show to headline, and then now I could say that I was able to headline. I wasn't very good at headlining at all. And there's a lot of clubs that never even want to see my name again because they're like, we lost so much money by getting talked into having that guy there for a week. And there were some bad shows. But yeah, there was, I got booked at a whole string of clubs. But then I did the Bob and Tom show, which is a morning show out of
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis, and they
Yeah.
were in like 200 cities. And then when I did that, I started getting emails from clubs all over the Midwest asking me to go in. And I had already headlined, so I would say that I'd want to be the headliner. And so everything came together there. But if it weren't for Doug, I don't know if I would have ever made it out of the LA open mic scene, basically. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was really no way to do it. You could get booked in the
Yeah.
Montreal Comedy Festival or one of those festivals,
Mm-hmm.
but you needed some big momentum in order to get there.
I do like, and I tell you, it has not. I don't think it's gotten too much better in the intervening years, because I've had like comics on this show that have been like on David Letterman and like late night spots, and have told me that they have a hard time getting on like a bar show in Los Angeles, and I'm like, really? Because I always thought at a certain point you kind of hit something, and then you kind of didn't have to worry about getting stage time. But I don't think that is entirely the case
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
You figure at a certain point you could be good, but that's great that Doug like saw something and like kind of gave you that leg up. I love him as a stand. Something I'm also curious about, just from like a shooting the shit like artistic kind of standpoint. I know you played
Mhm.
guitar on one of his albums,
Yeah, that was in Houston. I think that was that very week, actually. The
so
first one.
oh yeah. So I'm
Hmm.
I'm curious. Like if so, I'm assuming he asks you to do that. What kind of, because obviously there's a thought process going into like crafting a set or writing a song. How do you approach scoring a stand up comic
Hmm.
performance,
Well, I
basically?
I had this was something that Doug had me do before he had seen me do my own comedy, because we would go hang out, like, and it was just an amazing time. Like, he was just like, I often joke that he's like the guy who turned LA into like a big playground for me. Like, all of a sudden in my mid 20s, I was like, I remember him going, "Hey, we're going to some bar called Goldfinger or something, and it's in right in the seedy part of Hollywood. Here's my ATM. Here's the PIN number. Get us like $200 so that we have money to go drinking." And I was like, "What? This is insane! Like, where does this guy come from? Like, this is amazing." But this was just his life, and so like we went into this little bar, and I think Daryl Hannah was there or something like that, and then Doug went up on stage, and it was like it was incredible to watch him do the jokes that he was talking about. And he would talk about Daryl Hannah being in the audience, like he'd address the elephant in the room, and it was hilarious. And then he'd
Yeah.
invite me up to play guitar. He'd be like, "There's a guitar here, Henry, can you play the guitar, in the background?" And we started doing that as just sort of a regular fun thing. So I was so familiar with his act, I knew what he was about to go into. So I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to make the music real sad here." But I had been playing guitar at that point for about 15 years, so I really knew my way around the guitar. So I knew how to make it suddenly sound dark, and a couple of chords to make it sound suspenseful, and then we're in a happy setup time, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's some kind of climax or whatever, and
Uh huh.
so uh, that part was actually just pure fun. Like the stand up. So that week that I did that with Doug, so that album, something to take the edge off. What you're hearing is literally just a completely unedited show from beginning to end.
Yeah.
There's nothing added to that show, and it was just like, and that's the only one that I played guitar for. The rest of them he was just recording, but he didn't like any of them. So the last night he said, "Henry, come up and do the guitar thing," and so then that's what that was. But that whole week I was the opening act, and the the shows, it was exciting because it was my first time being at a comedy club or whatever. But that was a much more difficult experience. Once I was just like playing guitar for somebody else's act, that part was really pretty low pressure.
Mm-hmm. I can understand that. I play in bands and feel pretty confident, but
Oh wow.
if I was to, but I've the idea of playing like my solo acoustic stuff by myself on stage, that's scarier to me than being in a band or even doing comedy.
Yeah.
So I relate I relate to that. There's a certain kind of pressure. So after Bob and Tom, you're getting these kind of these headlining gigs, and I kind of love stories of like this era of headlining where you're not like maybe not quite the household name yet,
Mm-hmm.
and you're doing these kinds of like character building shows, shall we
Mm-hmm.
say?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
is there a particular show that stands out to you in your memory for being particularly, maybe not awful, but just memorable, maybe for the wrong reasons?
Oh yeah, there's one, and I think I talked about it on the Marc Maron show that is so devastating to me. It just knocked the wind out of me, and I didn't even go up for a couple months after that. I couldn't completely quit because I think I had dates on the books or whatever, and I had nothing else to do. But
Uh huh.
it was at the Improv in L.A., and there's plenty of shows that I did in Ohio also that were really bad, but for some reason this one in LA just was the one where everybody was there. There was a guy from the LA Times that my manager at the time had brought in who's like all she's like, this guy's going to do a story on you. This is going to be great. There was yeah, managers, agents, every comic that I really loved. I remember Greg Fitzsimmons was in the audience, and he was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And I remember just going, wow, he's out there. I think he was actually on the show too. There were like 5 great comics that all knocked it out of the park. And then I went on at the end, and I had a lot of buzz, so that a lot of the comics are, let's see what this guy's all about. You know, I want to see. And right from the get go, like my first joke, like the punchline was something about, I don't know what it was. That's why I carry a gun or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
there were like this. There was this table of like these enormous gangbanger type guys, like in the front, and this guy just yells, "Yeah, I got a gun and it's fucking loaded, bitch. What are you gonna do?" And I was like, "Okay, all right." And they were obviously getting really drunk, and they were enjoying the show up until the time that I got on there, and then something just turned, and then it
Yeah.
was just nonstop assault, a verbal assault on every single thing that I did, everything that I said, and I'm just standing there, and there's not. Uh, I honestly feel like if I was in that situation now, I'd be better because I don't care as much, and
Mm-hmm.
I just sort of, and it's also rare that that's allowed to go on as long as it did back then. But it
Yeah.
was so bad, and then the guys, and nobody kicked them out because there was nobody to kick them out. There was no bouncer or anything, so I just had to stand there and endure verbal assault for like an hour, and it was just a nightmare.
Oh my
And
God.
now I'm getting heckled by my cat, who might have to eat soon here, but which is just as
I'll
bad.
I'll
No.
have you out in like 10 minutes. Is that
Oh
okay?
no, that's all right. But so this is the interesting thing. I was recording that night, and I have a tape of that show. It's on a DAT tape, one of those old digital
Yeah.
audio tapes. I have not been able to bring myself to listen to it, but I don't throw it away. I still have it. Maybe one day before I die, I'll listen to it. But the memory of it is so bad that I can't even look at that tape because I'm like, ooh, it's all there.
Uh
And
huh.
I just can't, and it just would bring me back to such a humiliating time. Oh, and I also had a mailing list at that time. So I had a fan base that I was working on, and they were all there. Like, they were all there. And a couple of those people were people that I went to high school with who probably are just like, ooh, that was like watching a person just get pummeled for, an hour.
Right.
And that one was really just so bad that it really set me back. And it started making me afraid to deliver a punchline for a while because I was just like, I just always would hear that voice. Yeah,
Yeah.
fuck you, man. I would just constantly just assume that everything was going to end that way. But
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
no, I had a lot of bad shows. A lot of times the room in different bad shows that I had, the room would just erupt into people talking as if they're at a cocktail party and the show wasn't even happening. That happened a
Uh,
lot.
yeah.
And I would fall
That's
back
rough.
on that because I'd be like, all right, well, at least I'm just a guy. Like, in a worst case scenario, I'm a guy playing songs in the background while they're enjoying their cocktails, and that's a normal feeling. Like, uh, it felt like it would be worse if I didn't have the guitar back in those days, because then you're trying to do a joke and then a guy, I don't know. But yeah, it can be very cruel.
And so after you have an experience like that, because I know what that feels like, and you just like there's like a weird kind of shame. There's like sadness. Like I remember I've said this before, but the comic strip in New York used to have like basically a panel auditions for late night, and I remember getting like just personally insulted by several regulars and feeling really upset afterwards. And
Yeah.
what do you think it is? How do you get through? How do you get past that awful feeling to get and then continue to do it? What do you think it is for you that got you past that feeling?
Um. Well, I didn't have a lot of other options, so it's sort of like I have to make this work. My friend Mike McRae has this great quote. I don't remember if he said it on stage or on a podcast or something, but he was like, it's like when we're in our early 20s and we have this dream of being famous and I'm going to be on stage or whatever, and it's all great, and then you start blowing off other, like in his case, he's like his education was to be an engineer, and that's what he was doing when he quit to do comedy. And then cut to 12, 15 years later, he's married, kids, and then suddenly it becomes he's like, wow, I'm in a situation where I have to make this weird dream that I had 15 years ago as an early 20-year-old person. Like, I have to pull that off somehow. Otherwise, there's nothing, it's not like you can go in and get an engineering job and say, I've just been messing around for 15 years, So
Sure,
I think that's a lot of it. You don't really have it. You have to make this work because you've already kind of burned everything else, There's also the fact that you like it, you're sort of like, well, I'm gonna have to find the thing that I like about it again. I think that if something like that is enough to keep you from ever doing it again, then maybe you have to ask whether this was something you really wanted to do to begin with.
Totally, that makes sense. I guess it's like really easy to learn how to swim when the boat sinks.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Speak.
Yeah, it's like the immersion therapy or whatever.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you didn't let that defeat you. I have a couple things, a few more things I want to ask you.
Oh yeah, real quickly, just to insert something positive there. It was only a couple years after that I started finding what I felt was funny about me individually, and then starting to really, really enjoy comedy. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel there.
Right. So yeah, you kind of like you find like you're a groove, and then like it becomes more of it becomes I would imagine more fun once you know who you are on stage.
Exactly. For sure. Very much so.
Makes total sense. And then when did you get the idea to compile all of these experiences and write a feature film?
Okay, so when I was in college, the one I lied because I said there wasn't a shred of art going on, but there was a little bit because I befriended Greg Viens, who was a guy that I would sit next to at these political science classes, and he wanted to be a filmmaker. And this is right about the time that I started becoming going around to these open mic nights and doing my comedy songs, and I would tell him these stories, and we kept up our friendship after college. And he went to film school, and he was this guy. But hopefully that'll go away eventually. But so Greg, for his final project at Syracuse University, this is like 94 or 5 or something like that. He was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do my final project to get my master's in film or whatever, and I want to do a thing where it's basically all these stories that you tell me, and then we just basically recreate them in a mockumentary kind of fashion, sort of like Spinal Tap, or yeah, it was definitely very, very Spinal Tap, and so we did it. And so in '96, There is a full length thing. There's a couple of clips of it on YouTube. If people put in the original Punching the Clown original like vintage or something like that, and so there's some scenes in it. And then from that point on, and that was a blast because it was like, oh, all these stories are suddenly there's a new way to tell them. So the stories kept accumulating. Stories like the one that I told you that happened in 2000, about that awful show. So 2008 rolled around, and Greg at this point was a professor of film, and he showed up to my door one time, maybe more like 2006 or 7 or so, but we started writing this new script, and he was like, my friends are literally making their own movies with their own digital video cameras, and my students, he was a film professor, and he's like, I didn't get into this business because I wanted to, be a teacher. I wanted to make films. So let's do it. And so I started writing down, all of my favorite fun stories that I had accumulated in the last few years. One of them was I did a show in Amarillo, Texas, where it was I had a college agent for a second, and they booked me up at this Christian college, and nobody told me it was a Christian college, and I did this song that I was really proud of at the time about the end of the world and what I would do if it were the end of the world. And it's about, doing cocaine off a vagina, or they don't have a vagina, that's fine. Just kind of goes on. And it was received terribly. I did a whole hour show, and everybody was gone by the end. And the girl who was the one who was in charge of booking the comedians, which she was probably really proud of that job, she got fired from that, like while I was there. And she handed me the check, and she was bawling her eyes out while she was handing me the check. And I was like, this is so awkward. But I took the money, and I drove home, and I bought a new car, I think, because it was like a lot of money for back then. Those colleges were just this ridiculously weird thing where supply and demand didn't make any sense. It was just like, we're just going to give you a lot of money, even though we haven't listened to your CD that you sent us that's clearly got foul language on it and everything. So that was one of the stories. Then there was the story of doing a show in Hollywood where the deal was that I was supposed to get I think I was supposed to get like $4 a head or something like that, and the guy gave me like $14 at the end, but I had like 60 people there. So I was like, obviously I should have gotten $240, but also 14. There's an extra level of not making sense because it's not even divisible by 4. So it's like your number doesn't even work mathematically. Like that's the most obvious way that you give me the wrong amount of money. So we put that conversation in there. We had my manager at the time was trying to come up with a branding thing, and she said I was sort of like James Taylor on Smack. And I had to tell her that James Taylor actually was on Smack, so it wasn't a good, And then she's like, "Okay, well, we'll keep working on it." But anyway, so these were all stories that were so much fun to retell. And then there were about 50 actors, if I remember correctly, in the movie that were all just my friends from LA. Half of them comedians, half of them actors, and that's what that was. And so we made that movie. And that's right at that moment. If anybody's curious to know when I started finding out what I thought was funny about myself, it's in that movie, Punching the Clown. I felt like it's low key. I'm victimized. These are the things that my friends would laugh about when I would tell them these things, and it was very different from my act. My act was just going up on stage and trying to make them laugh with a lot of dick jokes and stuff like that, drinking jokes. A little bit hacky stuff, and then but the film was going to a different place, and that's when I felt like, oh, I think I can be this type of funny for the rest of my life, basically. That's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah, the film becomes like your Edinburgh Fringe style show, your theater show in a way. It's this like really great, this like really great movie that has a sequel. Is there? Do you
Well,
see
and I've
a
got Greg to, I
punching?
want to say I've got Greg to thank for that because I would have never, he was the one looking at it from a cinematic approach.
Hmm.
I was just still doing my act and stuff like that, but he's the one who was like, well, we're going to need to have the character change over time. We need other characters that he can respond to. So yeah, I just want to make it clear that he was a big part of that. Sorry.
Oh
What
no,
was
of
the
course.
next thing?
I was gonna say like because there's I know there's punching Henry as well, but
Yeah.
I appreciate that you give credit to Greg. It's
Yeah.
collaboration is something the joys of collaboration I'm learning later on in my life. Last thing I'd love to ask you, I'm because I watched your most recent special on your website today, and I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed it. I thought
Which
it was
anybody
like
can go to, by the way.
yes. I'll have all the links in
Oh,
the
sure.
description. I'm curious because I know you got dates coming up. Um, are you working towards? Have you been working towards the next special, or where's the act for you now?
Um, the act has taken a back seat as I've gotten older and less interested in getting on planes and spending time in random cities. I so about 10 years ago, did this silly video of me in my kitchen making food.
Hmm.
And it's called Henry's Kitchen, and it literally went viral. Like at the time, when everybody's like, "How do you get a viral video?" and I had it go viral. So it's got like, so the channel's got like millions of views now, and it's become sort of the thing that's my conduit for comedy, and I make those videos. I have a soundtrack album, and I've got cookbooks, and I've got a Twitch live series that I do live cooking twice a week, and it's pretty much what I do now. I'm not against the idea of going out and doing comedy. I do have a couple of shows, and I think that if I do go out and do comedy from this point going forward, I'm hoping that it's going to be a lot of Henry's Kitchen fans and a lot of fans of the movies and people that are there specifically because of they want me to be me, as opposed to showing up to the comedy club and just playing for whoever happens to be in the room. I think those days are done. I'm not going to do that anymore with the bachelorette party. Those are fun stories to put in a movie, but I have no interest in going out and do that. I'll do shows where but that said, I'm doing Key West, but that's because it's Key West. I might have a bad show there, so
Right.
so if anybody wants to come see me in Key West, you might see me do a horrible show, and that will be worth it.
Well, I'm happy for you and for the place you're at now, Henry, and I'm excited. As I said earlier, you I was introduced to your work during a kind of a developmental part for me, so I'm very
Wow, that's
appreciative and
cool.
inspired I'm inspired by you. So
That's
I
incredibly
appreciate that.
cool to hear. A real quick story, because just since I saw Maron yesterday, when we made the movie, it was all self-financed by the director Greg Viennes, and my cousins kicked in a little bit of money too, um, and there was no budget for PR whatsoever, like every film has. But it was on Netflix because this was early Netflix where you had the DVDs or whatever, and
Yeah,
it wasn't as big of a deal as being on Netflix is now. But
right.
we didn't have any way to get the word out, so I emailed all these people that I had met over the years that had huge podcasts, and of course, Marc Maron was one of them.
Yeah.
And most of them didn't return my email at all. Now my cat's starting to bite me. So, all right, sorry, but
It's
anyway,
totally okay. Okay, we
yeah,
can wrap this up soon.
no,
I'm
no,
sorry,
but
Kitty.
so okay, so uh, Marc Maron though was one of the people that got back to me right away, and this is at the height of his show's popularity. It was insanely popular,
Yeah.
and Marc Maron got back to me within 5 minutes. And here I am, just kind of sheepishly, and I know that I'm unknown, and everybody on that show was famous at the time. And so I just sheepishly asked him, "Hey, we've got this film. My buddy put his life savings into it. We just want to figure out how to get the word out, and if you can find a place for me on your show, that would be great." And he emailed me back within 5 minutes and said, "Yeah." I put his voice to the email. I could tell that there was some hesitancy, like, "Oh shit, okay, everybody on this show has been extremely famous. Henry's not famous, but we'll figure it out." And so then he had me on the show, and I was elated. I was like, "This is amazing." It was the first. I think it was the first podcast I had ever done.
Oh, wow.
Which, if I could go back and do it, I'd be a lot more relaxed. But I was really nervous because I knew how judgmental the audience could be about it. But Marc's spin on it was like, well, let's play some music at the end and let's have a good time with it. And I'm just forever grateful for Marc doing that. There was Marc Maron doing that, and there was also Sarah Silverman tweeting out the link to watch the show on Netflix. Those two things were our PR campaign, and they were probably worth way more than if we had an actual budget for PR and hired some publicist or something like that. So that was incredible that those two came forward like that. That was amazing. And we showed the movie at the Quad Cinemas in New York, in the Village, and all the local New York comics came out and showed incredible support. And New York was way more supportive than my LA friends were. Not to put down LA, but they just for whatever reason in New York the movie kind of went viral there, and it didn't out here.
That's wild. I guess it's hard to find parking in LA. You can take the train into New York.
Yeah. I think part of it is that New Yorkers are more on top of the new trends, and Netflix was the new thing. It was when people were living without a TV now, but you could watch everything on Netflix. That was like a really interesting moment when all of a sudden people were like just cutting their ties with regular TV, and they would just use Netflix to watch films and then go out and do comedy. And I think it took longer for that to happen out here, and I think that's why there were so many people there. I remember walking across the street in New York, and some guy recognized me from watching Punching the Clown. It was just like, wow, that's like amazing.
That's spectacular, man. That's
cool.
That's really great to hear. Thank you again very much, Henry. This has been really really nice, and I'll plug
Thanks,
your
Will.
website and everything in the description, and I'll let you go feed your cat. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Will. I really appreciate it, and thanks for letting me blab on. It's fun to talk about all this stuff.
Absolutely. It's great to listen to it. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. I am so sorry, Henry's kitty, that I delayed dinner, but that was a wonderful conversation. So I appreciate your sacrifice, Henry's cat. To hear some of those stories and to hear of this time and these experiences from somebody whose work I enjoy and have followed now, super exciting, really interesting stuff for me to hear about. I really, really enjoy that, and to see Henry in the place he's in now and the things that he has made. It's really, really cool, and I hope to continue in that path. So, folks, if you enjoyed this, Henry is doing live shows, so you can find links to those at his website, which will be in the description. His YouTube channel, where you can watch Henry's Kitchen, is a very hilariously entertaining cooking show, also in the description. And you can stream Punching Henry, which is now on Amazon. Punching the Clown, also available as well. Links to everything will be in the description as well. And if you enjoyed listening to this and know a friend who you think would enjoy this podcast as well, you guys are my biggest supporters and helpers in terms of letting other people know this is a cool show for cool people. If you guys enjoyed this, you can go to awesomedisaster.com. That has links to everywhere you can get the podcast. We are on Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify, as long as everywhere else you get your podcast. If you want to give us a follow and share some episode links, get other people listening to show, that'll help us in the eyes of our algorithmic overlords. And you can follow me on Twitter at ComicWillCarey, at WillCarey23 on Instagram. And if you want to go a little bit further in support of the show, you can check out our merch store as well as our Patreon, which I also have links to both of those also at awesomedisaster.com. And may you continue to find the things that bring you joy, even if they're just for you, or if they're just even if they're just for you. You don't have to, not every hobby or a job is a hustle or a side hustle. Sometimes it is self-care. I find doing fun things to be self-care, and you deserve it. So thank you all so much again for being here, and I will see you next week between awesome and disaster. Stay safe, wear a mask, get vaxxed and boosted, and stomp out fascism. Take care, everybody.